Welcome everybody to our third contemporary group online talks. Very pleased to say that tonight we have one of our own committee members, Ken Holland, ARPS, talking to us. This will be the last time those of you who are working will have to rush home for 6 o'clock, because from next month, and I'll say this again at the end, from next month we're putting it back an hour to 7 o'clock. To stop you having to rush through traffic lights at amber and so on. Ken is going to tell us about a project he did involving a Polish community. And funnily enough, I've come across similar stories from other Polish people I've known over the years, but I'm not going to spoil it. I'm going to hand over to Ken and ask him to take you through the evening. Now, Sean, our other co-host, will be taking questions. So if you wish to put questions to Ken, please feed them in through the chat to everybody, and Sean will pick them up and group them. There are going to be obvious places in Ken's talk where we can take questions. So that'll sort of break it up a little bit, allow you to ask questions relating to the previous section. And of course, at the end, we will also be able to take more questions. So what I'm going to do is stop sharing, and as I have done, and I'll pass you on then to Ken.
Thanks very much, Alan. Thank you. I'll do the screen share bit first. Hopefully you're getting a view of Teignmouth, where I live at the moment. If that's the case and all is going well.
We are.
Good. And manage and slideshow. You should have the title slide.
We have.
Good. That's what we want to know. Well, good evening, everyone, and lovely to see a few names and faces I already recognise. So that's good. And if I don't know you, well, maybe through the evening we'll get to know each other a little better. This evening, what I'm going to talk about is a project, probably my biggest ever photo project, which began back in 1995 and finished in 2013. And it was one of those that just kept going. In fact, it's almost still going on now. And it finished really the main part. This is the title or the front page of the book that I produced called Little Poland. And the whole evening, or the whole presentation, sorry, is dedicated to Liz. And she's a very, very dear friend. And I knew her through my wife. They used to work together. And Liz first told me about Ilford Park. And she was born there. She grew up there, and she even got married there. I knew her very well, but sadly died in the middle of my project, so she never saw the finished article, although I keep in touch with her family who live quite near me. She was a lovely, lovely person. That's her. Not the greatest photo, but that's her. And her parents were Polish, and they came to Ilford Park at the end of World War II. So I will tell you a little bit of history behind the project before we really get started, because without the history it probably won't mean an awful lot. It's very near to where I live. It's only a few miles away. It's a Polish home that began in 1945 as an American wartime hospital near Newton Abbot in Devon. And at the end of World War II, the Americans left. They'd been treating their injured soldiers and sailors there, and Air Force. And it was left for a couple of years until 1948, when it became a Polish home under the invitation of Churchill, who said he would look after the Polish people after the war. And they moved here to England mainly because Poland was, at the end of the war, it was also invaded by Soviet Russia. And a lot of the Poles didn't wish to remain in Poland, so they came here. And very quickly, Ilford Park Polish home became known as Little Poland by the locals. And they lived in what was basically the old hospital. They made it into something habitable. but it got in a pretty bad way. And in 1992, a new home was built for them, and they were beginning to get quite old, some of them. They all moved out. And in 1995, Liz said to me, "You really ought to photograph the old home. It's falling to bits. And it's part of our history. It's part of Devon's history. It's part of British history." So I did. And I photographed for about 5 years until I went in one day and there was asbestos dust blowing around from the vandals who'd been taking the asbestos off the copper piping. And in 2010, as you'll see later, it was demolished. It's all totally gone. There's no sign of it really there now. And in 2013, the site was leveled. It is now a park home for people who have literally park homes and started to live there. They've been built. So here we go. Do ask any questions through chat as we go if you don't understand anything. But I started in 1995 and I got permission from the Ministry of Works then to photograph it. Now this really terrible photograph, it's the worst one you'll see, probably was taken before I even started. It's not terribly good, from a hill a long way away, just to show you what Ilford Park looked like just after the inhabitants, the Polish people, had left. So it's not a particularly good photo, but it gives you an idea of the size of the place. And I got permission from the Department of Works to go in. They gave me some keys, and I drove in, and this is really one of the first things that you would see on the way in up the road. In fact, that sign of the two people crossing the road is actually still there at the moment. That's been left, one of the few little traces. And this was the first thing I came across. It was fenced because it was quite a dangerous site. I had to sign away life and limb that if I got injured while I was in there, it was my own fault. So that was the gate, the main gate, to which I had the key. And in I went. And it was like entering the Mary Celeste. There were signs of habitation, but nobody in there. The place was dead virtually, but there were so many signs of the life that the people who'd lived there had led. Most of the people living there, by the way, had pretty traumatic lives. They'd been in the concentration camps, they had fled Europe, they'd crossed Europe, and many were quite traumatized. So this is the beginning of what I saw, and the first thing I came up against was a no entry sign. And bit by bit, I just wandered around with Liz, and she showed me some of the places where she had lived and played and so on. And you wouldn't guess from looking at these what we're actually seeing. This was outside of the shop. They had a Polish shop which sold Polish food, basically the food they wouldn't normally buy in Britain. And that's from the back of the shop, in fact, where it says entrance, that was it. And the tower at the top is a water tower. So again, just the last sort of signs that they had been there. And as I walked through with Liz, it was pretty obvious that the place had partly been vandalized. It was secure, but not terribly secure. And there were bits of broken glass all over the place. It was actually quite dangerous. But the thing that struck me most was the lines of huts. They were everywhere. They were brick built. They were not insulated. They had asbestos, corrugated asbestos roof tops. And they were all in lines, and people often said they looked a little bit like the huts at Birkenau, which I have been to and visited 18 months ago, and I can see why people said that. But this is where they were given. They were given these huts and told, you live in there, they're all yours. No help, but that's where they were able to live. So wandered around. Some were in better condition than others. And these were sort of rather better. This was at the other side of the shop, but still partly fenced off. I could get inside of that fence. I was lucky that I could get there. So the first few images you're going to see are all of the outside as I wandered around the outside before we actually go in. And later on in the talk, we will go inside. But it gives you an idea of the state of what these places were. And each of these huts was full of rooms, and each room housed a family, which could have been anything up to 8, with mother, father, could have been grandparents, could have been children, one family per room, and they weren't very big rooms. But as you can see already, they were beginning to fall into disrepair. Some of the doors were open, animals had been in and out. It wasn't terribly clean. There was fencing everywhere, but evidence that people had lived there. They had their TV aerials, of course, because that's, you know, what they were. They were sort of becoming anglicized. Many of them worked in the local factory, which was there. It was a frozen food factory, which eventually became a huge supermarket come shopping complex called Trago Mills. But outside, just signs that people had lived there, that the dustbin, the little safe outside where they would have kept food cool. This was on the north side of the house. Wherever I went, there were just little signs like this. And you just imagine what life was like for the people who lived there. They were keen gardeners, apparently, and in the spring, these daffodils had pushed their way through the weeds, the brambles, and everything else in front of the houses. Now, each window you see there would have been one room, and one room for one family. It shows you how cramped the conditions were. Liz did tell me it was some of the happiest times of her life there, although life was hard. She enjoyed growing up, and the community spirit was just incredible, and they all looked after each other. One or two very incongruous things, like this ladder, a wooden ladder. Why it was left like that, I have no idea. You could walk in through the door and get into that room without climbing through the ladder, but that's how I found it. And everything you see is untouched by me. I've not moved anything. I've not set anything up. It was all as I found. One of the things that intrigued me was the number of wheelbarrows. There were wheelbarrows everywhere, and where they came from, I have no idea. And there were also, as you'll see later on, pushchairs and prams. And they very resourceful people, the Polish people, they could use these to make things. They would take the wheels off these prams and pushchairs and use them to make into carts for moving stuff around the site. Here's another pram here, obviously been there quite a long time. This is not the best photograph, actually, but this apparently was the warden's house. I hadn't realised there had been a warden there, but there was a warden on site, and she and her family lived in this little house, which was quite different to the other huts. It was probably better furnished and probably better insulated, but it had been boarded up, but the door was still open. There were numbers everywhere. Every block and every corridor had numbers on, and I don't know whether that's a legacy from the Americans or whether it was put there during the time of the time that the Polish people were living there. I really don't know. Apparently the phone box was a very important part. It was the only phone on the site for a long time, just that one. And I know Liz said that there were often queues outside waiting to use the telephone. That's obviously been a little bit updated, but it's still the old style press button B to get your money back. The chimneys behind are from the central heating. The heating provided the whole site with its hot water, and you could see those everywhere you went. They were a sort of landmark. More of the daffodils, more of the pipes, and you can see a little bit there behind the pipes of the community hall, which we'll look into in a minute. They built this after the Americans had gone. They got their own, like a village hall really, for the people to go in and play together, had put on pantomimes, shows, musical evenings, dances, and so on. That was just there. One thing I was told, which I wouldn't have guessed, that the Polish men particularly loved garden sheds, and they would all have their garden sheds. Women were not allowed in them. The men would meet in these huts and sheds, and they would actually make Polish spirit. And loved it, but it was strictly men only, and I think even the children were kept out. I don't know when the boys became men, when they were allowed in, but there were huts everywhere. Most of them were falling really quite dangerously apart, but I did manage to find one or two that were in a reasonable state. This is not a trick of the camera. It was leaning, and it was just like that. They also had outside store cupboards, safes to keep food cool in the summer. And I found several of these. Some of you will recognize the National Dried Milk tin there. I can remember those from when I was young. And everywhere you went, there were decaying curtains. The paint was really peeling off, and I felt rather sorry for whoever lived in number 13, but that was one of them. Now we're going to go inside. It's a reasonable time to stop if anybody's got any questions that have come through yet. Have we had any, Sean? I'm guessing not.
Yeah, there have been quite a few I've seen come in. Sean, there you go.
If not, we can carry on. It's okay. Yeah. Well, I won't pause for too long. We'll carry on. What I'm trying.
The group chat. There's some questions in the group chat.
Yeah, I'm not seeing those at the moment.
Yeah, he said one of them was, what excuse did you use to get permission to photograph?
I used the Royal Photographic Society. I said I was an associate, and that was one of the big reasons for getting in. And it took me 6 months, a lot of emails, a lot of letters, and signing my life away. But I finally got in there. But yeah, it was the RPS was the main thing. So well done, RPS.
And then I have got a couple.
Okay.
Have you got any photographs of what it was like when it was in use?
No, there are one or two. There are not many. There were one or two films made of the people on site, and one or two still photographs. But my main reason for doing this was to photograph it after they'd gone. I didn't know it, to be honest. I didn't know it was even there until they'd moved out. It did actually move to a new home. I can show you the new home in a minute, but I've deliberately not shown pictures of the people who are living there, although I've met quite a few.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Very good. Sorry about that. I had a technical failure there with the mic. And now it's echoing.
Okay, we'll do another question and move on if you like, if we've got any more.
Yeah, it was really from Paul about, were you placed under any constraints under what you could publish when you got permission to go and take a look around? No,
none whatsoever. Pretty much anything. And I came across some things, as you'll see in a minute, that were more personal possessions. But the one part, there was a hospital there, a Polish hospital, not an American hospital. And somebody had very thoughtlessly left medical records blowing around in the wind. But I deliberately did not photograph those. I didn't feel at all comfortable. In fact, it's one of the few things I actually bagged up and said, I took it to the new home and said, look, these are blowing around. They're confidential. That's the only thing I think I removed.
You made a comment earlier about the place looked a lot like Birkenau. I think looking at the chimneys of the boiler house that really brings it home to me from the time I visited Auschwitz.
Yes, yeah, there are one or two you'll see from inside in a minute that again, people have said it reminded them of Auschwitz. And I only went there 18 months ago and I could see exactly what they meant. It was quite a moving time.
You said as well, Ken, that the rooms are very small for each family.
Yeah.
Talking to my Polish colleagues who I'd met when I worked in Nigeria, basically in Poland, most people lived in very small flats as well.
Yeah.
Even university professors and so on. So they didn't really, you know, it was not that different.
Yeah, I think because of the rough time that they'd had, I mean, as I say, many of them had been in concentration camps. Many had fled and taken months to cross Europe. I think they were glad to have anywhere at all to keep a roof over their heads and be relatively warm, although these buildings weren't. But we'll move on a little bit, and if the questions come in, I can take them in a minute, if we're happy to do that. What I thought we'd do is almost like sort of moving further into the camp from outside through the corridors. There's only a few of these, but wherever you went, there were corridors, and some of them were sort of semi-open and opened onto the outside and were just covers to keep the rain off. And others like this one were actually inside. This would have been built by the Americans as part of the hospital. And that's exactly as I found it. But it was interesting, and I'll come back to this later on, how nature was already saying, I'm having this back. You know, there were plants growing everywhere I went. And this one had obviously found a little patch of sunlight. For the photographers, and I guess most of you will be, all of this was photographed on medium format on a Mamiya 645 with a tripod, and we're talking very long exposures later on indoors of a minute or so. Another corridor, the fencing is fairly recently put there. That wasn't put there in the times of the camp. It was put there to keep people out afterwards, to protect the site. But again, corridors everywhere. There were chairs everywhere as well. A lot of people said, did I put that there? No, I didn't. Think it's exactly as I found it. This crutch was just lying across the corridor. And I think it had got Torbay Hospital written on it. It had obviously come from the local hospital at Torquay and never returned. The ward numbers are not the American ones. This was because of the times. Many of the people living there were obviously in a pretty poor state, health-wise, because of the treatment they had had. So there were wards everywhere as well. Physiotherapy, obviously very necessary for them. But still, corridors wherever you went. It was actually quite to begin with. I almost got lost. It took me quite a while to find my way around. It was bigger than you would think. And as well as the corridors, I'll just talk a little bit about the community there as well, because it sort of ties in, because it gives you an idea of what life was like. The hospital obviously was very important. Even the poor sign was beginning to look a bit sad. And as a community, they had communal bathrooms. Each block had one bathroom, which would have been used by maybe 10 or 15 families of maybe 7 or 8 people. So they didn't get the chance to have a bath very often. And I can remember stopping here with Liz, who fondly remembered using this toilet. And I said, how many would have used that? That was the toilet for the block. And she said there could have been 70 or 80 people in that block, which again gives you an idea of what life was like. Another one, similar one. I loved this one in a way because it had got a small tree, a little sapling growing in it. The roof had given way, the door had fallen off, and this sapling was pushing up through it into the light. One of the washrooms, still evidence of nature coming back. It would have been tempting to have moved some of it, but as I say, I didn't move a thing. Really didn't want to move anything. And even the sinks had plants growing in them. But I think in one or two blocks they had more than one sort of wash basin, but they were literally shared by most of the people in each block. Also, there were power plants and various places around which were used by the whole community that sort of serviced the entire site. Most of these were left open. There were little signs all over the place that sort of told you what they were. But some of the equipment had been taken out as the place was closed down. Very, very few signs in Polish, which was quite strange, although I think a lot of them were taken as almost like souvenirs. But this was in the community hall, and it was the sort of reception desk. And I just loved the juxtaposition between ringing for attention and the sign for the ladies' toilet. And a broken light bulb. How on earth it ended up there, I really don't know. Part of it may have been because the site was vandalized. There were vandals who got in before I got in there, so it did spoil things a little bit. This one's quite telling. You can see an outline up here. It's not the actual original image. There was a sort of cutout that had been stuck into a frame on the wall in the community centre. As I say, this community centre, I think, was built in the early 60s, but all the bits had fallen off and there were bits on the floor, but the outline stayed there. And it was apparently, according to Liz, it was a picture of two ladies in Polish national traditional dress who had been depicted just dancing there, which was quite appropriate because they held dances there at weekends. Made their own music, obviously played their own instruments, and had a good time. There was a little bar there as well. There was also a communal dining hall. The various families, if they wished, could meet up and eat in the kitchen and dining hall. This was the dining hall. And very appropriately, the calendar for 1992 was still sort of stuck to the table, and that's the year that they all left this home, this camp. But quite interesting that some of the decor, that you've got the rising sun decor up in the ceiling there, which I think might have been a legacy from American use. I really don't know. I've never found out. But this was the dining hall. And actually on the table, very hard to make out, it was a Christmas cracker, sort of an attempt to make a Christmas cracker, and it was still there. And this was the kitchen. I'm not sure when that dates back to. Obviously very much more recently than the American occupation of that site. They're actually still fit reasonably clean. Very important part of the whole place was the little chapel. Most of the Poles who were living there were quite keen churchgoers, mainly Roman Catholic, from what Liz told me. But that was the chapel. That was the one of the side entrances to the chapel, and that is where Liz got married to Nick. I know Nick very well. He's still in Teignmouth with his family, with his two daughters. And that's where they were actually married. Quite small, and it's got a lot of character. That's from the other side. We still have the heating pipes there. What I loved was it was obviously a place that people love going to, and these two chairs looked like they'd been used quite often. This was just around the back of the chapel. There, you can just imagine the conversations that went on. But the chapel had been boarded up, every window was boarded. And that's the main entrance. That's where Liz and Nick would have gone in and come out on their wedding day. And very strange, the windows of the chapel were boarded up, and I'd gone inside, it was virtually pitch dark. And one of the doors was open, it had glass in it, and at the time I walked in, the light bounced off the glass of the door into the chapel. What used to be the high altar had been moved, but somebody had put a little wooden cross back onto where the altar used to be, and the light was lighting up that cross. I did not put that there. I didn't change the door. It was exactly as I found it. I just could not believe that I'd seen that, and it would only happen for a few minutes at that time with the sun where it was. So quite poignant. Wherever you went, wherever you go, there are little tiny details, which I'll come on to a little bit more in a minute, of just doors, windows, all sorts that have been used and used and used, almost to the point of being worn out. This would have been an American door originally, painted probably by the Polish people, and still in use. Right, a little break if you want before we go into the fine details of what people left behind.
Great. There's a few questions, if you can hear me this time.
Yes, please, Sean, yes.
Okay, so there's been a couple of questions really asking around the American times. Now, are you aware of any photographs that exist from those times that you could, that people could potentially look up?
I don't think so. I've obviously researched it a bit myself, and I have yet to find anything from the American habitation at all. I don't know that they would have had time to take many photos. It would have been a really busy place. It was built quickly, built very cheaply, did its job, and they moved off. So no, I'm sorry, I haven't found anything.
Yeah, okay. There's a couple of technical questions, or technically related. You mentioned earlier about you using your Mamiya to take these. Presumably that was on film.
Yes.
And you've obviously made it therefore a deliberate choice about your media. It's black and white. What was it like in colour? What's the place like as a colourful, or was the place like as a colourful place to visit?
It wasn't very colourful at all. That's why I opted to use black and white. It was quite drab. There would have been colour when people were living there, I guess. The Poles generally are quite a colourful people from what I've seen. They do like bright colours, but no, it was dull and drab. And I thought from the very first time I went there, this has got to be a black and white project. So yeah, it was all Mamiya, it was all medium format, all black and white film, and I think I took over 1,000 images. So what you're seeing is just the highlights.
Yes, a lot of work. So and there's a question here about where did the Polish folk move on to? I know that you said they went to a new place.
Yes, yeah, I'll show you one or two photos of that in a minute. It was literally about a quarter of a mile away. It was purpose built. It was built, they could see it being built because it was right next to them. And when it was finished, they were told, right, we'll have Christmas, and then to celebrate the new year, we will move from the old home to the new one. And it was literally walking along the road.
Very good.
Yeah,
now,
it was.
So that home is still occupied?
Yes.
Are you doing a project to document it while it's occupied and while people are still there?
No, it would be difficult because they don't particularly want too many people going in and out. Most of the people there now are not from Ilford Park. They've come from all over Britain because they're all in their 90s, and many are over 100 years old now, and obviously pretty frail. And many still don't even speak English, even though they've lived in in England since 1950. So no, it's not a project I thought I would get into. I've seen the new home. I've been round it. I've been inside, but they did say we would rather you didn't photograph us. But that's, and you have to respect them for that.
Clear.
Roughly how many people lived in it at its height, and how many moved into the new home, Ken, do you know?
The new home, I think, houses about 80 people. The original site would have had hundreds of people there, but most of them, like Liz, grew up. They left the home and married locally, moved out, found jobs, went to school, and obviously weren't too keen to go back. So those numbers just began to fall away. The people who'd moved there first didn't really want to get too involved with local people. They've got their own community, but obviously they had to get work. And I remember Liz saying it at school, you know, she went to primary school and she had to learn English straight away. And there was quite a lot of prejudice. They were obviously looked upon with some sort of wonderment, I guess, by the local children, because they wouldn't have known in those days, in the 50s, in the middle of Devon, they wouldn't have known many people who'd come from other countries. I wouldn't have thought. But as Liz said, they're very intelligent, very clever people, and they actually very soon mixed in, and she felt quite happy after a year or two. Okay, shall we move on a little bit?
Please do.
Yeah. So a little bit closer in again, I'm just looking at the personal possessions that people left behind. They only needed to move them a few hundred yards, and I could never figure out why some of these things were ever left, why people didn't want to take them. Just a collection of an old kettle and some wheels. Wheels were treasured. They used the wheels to make all their little carts that they used for carrying stuff around. They would never waste wheels. You would have thought they might have taken the teapot, unless it was an old one or a spare one. This was outside. So I say I've got probably 30 or 40 pictures of prams, pushchairs. This was made. It wasn't obviously like that when it was new. It would have been put together by somebody, or probably passed on from family to family. And there would have been children in there, would have been a baby in there or a couple of babies in that little pram. But still outside, it had survived being left outside. So more of them. They were treasured because, of course, they came here with nothing. They had to really make do, and they are a very resourceful people, from what Liz tells me. They could almost make anything from anything you gave them. So quite fascinating to see these things everywhere, even inside. And lots of wheelchairs, because a lot of them were, say, quite disabled and had obviously had accidents and injuries from the war and possibly from the concentration camps. This is my favorite image of the whole thing, which has actually won me a gold medal in a competition. Well, not competition, it was the members exhibition from the PAGB. And a lot of people said, did you put the sign there? And I said, no, if you'd walk around the corner and seen a wheelchair with Way Out next to it, and you were a photographer, you'd photograph it. But it sort of summed the whole place up. I went back a week later and the wheelchair had been moved. Vandals had moved it. But that's exactly how I found it. Say, personal possessions. This was obviously a loved chair. It had been used, it had almost been polished, and because it was inside, even with an open window, it was still in quite a good state. All sorts of bits and pieces that families would have used that were left. As I said, I did say I didn't move anything. The only things I did move were doors. I opened cupboards if I could without damaging things, and just to see what was inside. This exactly as I found it. Obviously didn't need to take even pasta and sugar and salt and the saucepans with them. And I think it was a lady's wardrobe, but left the hairdryer behind. Again, as I found it, you know, womancraft next to the rubber gloves. make what you will of it. I guess you wouldn't want to take the rubber gloves with you. Quite a nice coffee pot. And this, I think, it was next to the warden's house. I don't think it would have been a family. I think it might well have been somebody who was in administration who'd left this, but it was actually quite a nice coffee pot. Another of my favorites, this is an almanac, a calendar from 1953. Why they would leave a pair of glasses there, I really, really don't know. But that's exactly as I found it, with cobwebs and spiders' webs around it as well. A Polish Bible. I did actually flip the pages just to see what was inside. It was in Polish, but it was very wet. The whole thing just fell to bits. But again, somebody's watch. This is in a living room. The hat was there. That's close up. I went back a few weeks later, everything had been moved. I've no idea who would have moved it, but people obviously did. Bottle of ink. This was a mirror. It was like a little writing desk, and the table lamp had just been knocked over. You can see the state of the place even after 3 years without use. Some of the walls and timber work and so on was deteriorating quite quickly. And if you go back, you've almost got the same picture there, but they're not. It was a different room. So whether there was several of these pictures put around, I don't know. Liz said to me she remembers the person whose room that was and remembers him wearing that dressing gown. So I say, sadly, Liz died in the middle of this, so I wasn't able to get all her memories. She was only in her 40s and had breast cancer, sadly, and quite quickly from being diagnosed to actually going under with it. Such a shame. Lovely, lovely person. Clothes left behind. Quite nice clothes as well. They weren't in a bad state. There's obviously a man's jacket in reasonable condition to say it had been there for 3 years. This is what somebody said that reminded them of Auschwitz. I can see why. Again, children's shoes mainly. It was a cheap little purse, a little plastic purse. Somebody told me about, some of you may remember a TV presenter called Judy Spires, used to do Pebble Mill, and comes from Devon. And she had seen this image of mine, this photo of mine in an exhibition, and contacted me, and she bought a print of that because she is from a Jewish family. And she said it reminded her of Auschwitz. So I'm quite honoured to have thought that Judy Spires should buy one of my prints. And then, you know, still shoes, odd little bits that people would have used and worn, just left behind. And it's, I think, a shopping bag that it's resting on. These apparently were quite valuable, and I did tell somebody about them. They are silver spurs, and they are cavalry spurs. As would have been used by the Polish cavalry. Somebody had obviously brought them with them. And I did mention them, and I think I did take them to the new home eventually. Well, somebody came and took them, and I showed them, and they said they really ought to be in a museum. They are quite valuable. They're ceremonial spurs. There are no sharp spikes on them or anything. They're just for show, but they apparently are solid silver. But hopefully in a museum somewhere. Again, a few sort of personal things, and I was quite careful what I photographed. I didn't want to include names and so on. But this was, I think, a travel club, and it's actually about Krakow, and Wawel is the castle there. And whether people had been there, I don't know. Again, you would have thought somebody might have treasured their old records. this was one of the most moving of all. It was a Palm Sunday cross, and it had been put in a wine bottle, and those flowers had just withered and died with the age of it. It would have been there several years, but there was still water in the bottle, in the wine bottle. It was up against a window. We'll have a little break. If there's a couple more questions we can put in. Sean, do we have any?
There's some really comments about how rapidly it seems that people left. You know, it's like they left in a hurry and you know, they left behind lots of belongings, religious pictures.
Yeah.
It really seems strange when they only live next door.
That's the one lasting memory I have, is why did they leave it? Because they knew for probably a year they would be moving, and they knew roughly when. And it was very strange to go in and find what obviously was quite important to some people, but they obviously just left them and never went back for them. Quite strange. I really don't know the answer to that.
Yeah, that's just a strange one. There was a few comments about that. So
yeah. Any more, or sure, I can move on a little bit if you want.
I can move on.
Okay. So I was getting towards the end of my photographing. I'd sort of photographed as much as I really wanted to, in a way. But one thing that struck me was the fact that you don't leave anything for very long before nature decides, I'm having this. And actually, I must admit that I didn't take much from here. I took a lot of blackberries. I had some superb blackberries from there. And nature did come back. It sort of clawed its way back through windows and doors quite quickly. It was a haven for wildlife. I've seen deer, foxes, buzzards, kestrels, hundreds of blackbirds. There is actually one block still remaining after it was felled, because there are bats in it, and the bats are protected. So nature is still in there, and that's all been fenced off. But yeah, wherever you went, it was actually quite pretty, quite beautiful in its own way, to see nature coming back in. This is again one of my own favourites. It may not mean much to you, but I love the way in which the blackberry, the bramble leaves were coming down. But in that little safe, I had noticed a few weeks before blackbirds flying in and out. And when I got closer, I realised they were actually nesting in there. There's a blackbird's nest inside there, and they raised a little family. And sadly, I'd gone round there about 4 or 5 weeks later, and as I say, the place is often open to vandals, and they had smashed the whole thing up, which was very sad to see. Luckily, the blackbirds had at least hatched their young from there. But without me telling you, you wouldn't know what was in there. Even the chairs, it's just so strange to see this happening. Wherever I went, it seemed to be blackberries and brambles all the time. So one or two have asked about the new home. I'm not going to show you loads of photographs of that, because in a way it's a sort of different story, but just along the road, and it's still there, you can go to it. Something very different. They have this beautiful new home built. It's like a hotel. And it's still part of Churchill's promise to the Polish people that this country would look after them. And I can remember years and years ago, a camera club colleague of mine who trained Spitfire pilots in the war said to me that if it wasn't for the Polish pilots in the Battle of Britain, we probably would not have won it. And he had a huge amount of respect for the Polish people. And he said they deserve to have this. So it's a brand new home. It's a lovely sign outside, all in silver. The little cross that was peeping up it's actually a little tiny corner, which was quite quiet, a quiet corner. And each part of the home, some were inside and some had it was almost like little bungalows. They could come and go as they pleased. And this is a bit like one of the corridors in effect, but outside. But say beautifully built. It was all opened up in oh, let me think. I think it's 1992. So that's the new home. That's all I really wanted to show you of that. But the next part of the story, there's a bit of a break, and I'd sort of finished the job, and somebody rang me up and said that the diggers have just moved in to Ilford Park just before Christmas in 2010, and they've started demolishing the place. And I felt really quite upset. I thought, but I've got to get out there. And I got there in time to see the demolition beginning. Just in time to see the diggers knocking down all the old buildings. They had to do it quite carefully. They'd been several years stripping out asbestos. It was full of asbestos and it had to be carefully taken away, of course. In fact, that was one of the reasons why I stopped, because I went in one day and there was asbestos blowing around where they'd hacked the asbestos off copper piping to take the copper. And this was on a very cold December day, I think about middle of December, when they actually started on this. And I was more or less chased off. They didn't really want me there, but I still managed to get a few photos. And that will show you what the weather was like at the time. It was like something from World War I. It was just so, you would have been knee deep in mud if you'd walked through that at that time. So I managed to get a few photos of the final days of the old camp. Not very pretty, but part of the story. And strangely enough, when they'd finished, when they'd knocked all this down, they'd cleared the site, and it took several months. And I went back again in about April, May time, and I started walking around, and the strange thing that I found, more than anything, I kept finding faces. And there was nothing there. They were just flat, featureless slabs of concrete where the huts had been. But wherever I went, I saw faces. And once you start to see one or two, you see quite a few. And they struck me as being faces that were actually quite almost in anguish, quite hurt. And I began to feel almost like it was the souls of the people who'd come from Poland, who'd gone through all the hardships they'd been through to come here. And I've got, must be a couple of hundred photographs. I'd actually photographed these weren't done on the Mamiya, on the 645. I actually photographed these with a digital camera. It was much later, going up to 2010 now. But still found these. And that's how it ended up. All of those huts have all gone. And that's all that's left are the empty slabs. And all that's left are the memories, really. Now, if you go there now, where these slabs are, they now have park homes, very nice park homes, and they've spent a lot of money on levelling the site and building some really, really nice places for people to come and live. It's a great spot. It's very near the dual carriageway to get to Plymouth to Exeter. It's very easy to get into Newton Abbot. It's flat, it's level, and it's a sun trap. It's very sheltered. And they've got a lovely park across the road with a big lake in it and a golf course. So it's got a lot going for it. So that really is the end. That's the shadows that I found one day. And it all ended up in my little book, Little Poland. That's really the end. If you've any questions, I'm happy to take them. But so say thank you for following me through this little journey.
Okay, that's great. Sean, have we got?
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. I think actually a good one might be the why the Ilford name? It's a good one for photographers, of course, but
Yes, yeah. Yeah, most of the film I used, funnily enough, was Ilford. I don't know. It was always known as Ilford Park. I think it was probably originally it was a part of a manor or something like that. I really don't know. Again, I've researched and I don't know. So again, sorry, I can't help you with that one.
Yeah. Okay. One for me actually. What's a park home?
It's basically a caravan.
Gotcha. Right.
A very-
Okay. So
a
these
very
very large static caravans.
Yeah, a very upmarket static caravan that's going to set you back over 200,000.
Yes, we can buy houses for that.
Yes.
Okay. I guess really some more comments related to the this rapid move. Asked about some of the houses. Did they move in phases? Did some of them move earlier? Perhaps they planned and moved their things, and then some others just suddenly went, "Oh, I didn't think I was ever going to move," and just had to up sticks.
I'm not sure. As I said, by the time we got to that sort of stage in the project, Liz had died. So I'd love to be able to ask her, but from what I understand, the move took place over just a couple of days. That's all it was. They were more or less told, we're closing up. The new home is over there. There was transport provided. They didn't have to walk or anything. It was, say, a matter of a quarter of a mile, literally, along a road. It was quite safe. It's the only road through the whole camp. But no, it happened fairly quickly. But they had been given plenty of notice on this.
Ken, there's been a couple of questions about can you buy the book, and I noticed somebody's put a link up to blurb for it.
Yeah, that's my website. If you look up Ken Holland Photography, you'll come to my website anyway. There's a link to the book from the website. It's published by Blurb. Loenna, by the way, is the name of our house. It's a Cornish name because I'm from Cornwall. It means joy, peace, and happiness. But there is a link to the book from there, and I'd sell maybe 2 or 3 a year. That's all. But if you want to buy any, please do. Keeps the sales ticking over. I'm not going to get rich on it, but there are over 100 photographs in there.
Yeah, as many people are saying, it's a great project and it's great to capture the story.
Yes, it was. I mean, it took me a long time to decide when to actually make the book. When did I feel the project had finished? And in fact, it's still ongoing. I've actually now been photographing the park homes and the people who are living in them. It's like another story again. And, it's one of those that may never, ever finish. I really don't know.
Have you ever sort of have you done the show to the people who live in the park homes?
No, what I've done, in fact, there may be somebody from the home listening tonight because they know the talk is on, so they may well have registered, I don't know, but I have been into the home and presented them with a copy of the book, which was really quite nice to do. And it made the local newspapers, and it was also on our local BBC news as well. But yeah, it was a difficult one to know what to do because they may look at my book with maybe not quite such happy memories. I don't know, because a lot of it is about things that have happened and not looking too pretty. Again, it was a difficult decision to make. But yeah, they're aware of hopefully of the book. And there's also a copy of the book that the people who are selling the park homes, they've got a copy in their reception area as well. A lot of people have commented on how interesting it was to see it.
Okay.
Do you want me to come out of screen sharing, Alan? Then we can see you as well in all your glory, if you like.
Yeah.
I can see a few people around as well. Any more questions?
Lots of really positive comments generally, and there's been some notes which are worth cutting and pasting if people are interested, of similar sorts of places that are out and about. Obviously, this wasn't the only one. There's others in the world as well, elsewhere.
Yeah, there are. There were quite a few all around Britain. And what happened was that as they closed bit by bit, they'd just become uninhabitable. They'd deteriorated. Most people had moved out, but the few who remained in some of them were moved down to Ilford Park to the new home because that was purpose built. And that they're able to be looked after and cared for, you know, in really lovely surroundings. To get the care and the help that they need.
Good.
Yeah, there's an interesting diaspora of the Polish people that come across a lot in. I worked briefly in Cannock, and that whole area had a whole Polish community with Polish shops as well, so probably linked. And of course, Cannock Chase has the Kachin Memorial on it. Which is,
Yeah.
interesting. So, but thank you very much, Ken. You'll see all the comments because we recorded this, and
Thank you.
The chat file comes with it. So thank you so much for a fascinating talk. I'm sure everyone has really enjoyed it. And I just once again say on behalf of everybody that's on the call, thank you very much. And I'll just share my screen because I've got a slight advert to share. Can you see that? And basically, thank you, Ken, for a fascinating talk. It has been amazing. I had a quick preview of it during the week, so I knew what was coming, or some of what was coming, and it went extremely well, and I'm sure everyone enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Folks, as I said, next month we swap to the later time of 7 p.m. 1900 hours, and our next talk should also be fascinating because it involves a young woman called Rahab Eldalil, who is from Cairo and is based there. She'll be talking to us from Cairo, and you may have seen her. Those of you who are in the Royal will have seen her work in the students section of the first edition, the first new bi-monthly edition of the journal. And she'd be talking about working with the Bedouin people from whom she's descended, and the links using their photography and their traditional crafts to forge links with the modern world. So that I'm really looking forward to. And that's on the 23rd of November, and bookings are available for that and other talks going through to next year. So I'll stop sharing at that point and say thank you to everybody, and we'll end it there, and good night and thanks for attending.
Thank you all. Thank you. Bye. Bye, everyone.